hire the best officers you can and then get out of the way. So this isn't a new notion, but we find that it's very difficult for so many leaders in their professional lives and their personal lives to really understand and internalize the idea that as leaders, we have some ability to navigate and influence, but the idea of control, that is truly illusion. And one of the things we talk amongst ourselves and our team is we often say, show us someone who always needs to be in control, and I will show you, and we will show you someone that's miserable and unhappy, and we will show you a team and people all around that person that is also very likely miserable and happy. So we're going to talk about that today, and more importantly, look at some of the things that we've done to get around that, and also we've seen other really strong leaders that we work with and have worked with, and we've worked for, how they do it. So I'll open it up to you guys, and I'll start with you, Vera. How do you think about this? How would you define this illusion of control? And I will just take the conversation from there.
Right. Thank you, Brian. I think that prior to defining the illusion of control, I would actually define control itself. Because obviously we look at it very often as something half negative or maybe negative. And I think that control as a concept itself, it shouldn't have this negative weight. And the question is not really about control itself, but how the control is executed. So if it's executed in the wrong way, and then it creates actually an illusion of, the total control and really keeping the situation, keeping the situation under control. So then it becomes negative. But control as it is, I think, until certain points is reasonable, because as a leader, as a manager, you have objectives, you have regulations, you have restrictions, and the question of how to get the things done and how to get them done in the right way and how to keep the team motivated, I think it's still somehow included in this concept of control. And the illusion of control, I think that, in my understanding, is the illusion of really total control. That is to say, I have my objectives, this is the way to go, this is the way to do it, and this is the only way. And then we now see, and it can be exposed to a wide array of external factors. You can have some what we call force majeure circumstances within the company. You can have new ideas, and it can, in a way, help you to change the path. But if you approach it with a very square head and really looking into comparing, your plan with the present situation, there you just get yourself very limited and don't reach your objective.
You speak a lot of languages. You've worked all over the world, Russia, Spain, France, other places. You've worked with all walks. Do you find that the North American idea of this illusion of control is different than other places around the world? Same? How do you just react to that?
I would definitely say that, I wouldn't say it's a cultural concept, but it definitely varies between cultures, because I think that the perception of control and the illusion of control has to do a lot with tradition, with culture, with also maybe the structure in the society. Like, for example, I don't know, ex-communist countries, they tend to develop stronger control mechanisms, and maybe people, they also feel it and apply it in organizations. Not everywhere, but it can happen. The same we can say, for example, about some certain European countries that where people are a little bit less or more risk averse than in the United States. So obviously, this factor of risk aversion plus regulations you have in the economy, in the country, they also influence control mechanisms and how control is perceived in companies and how executives actually use it obviously for the good of the organization, but sometimes if not applied in the optimum way, it can lead to just counterproductive results. So I would definitely say that it varies across countries, and I think that globally speaking, obviously, the counterproductiveness of excessive control and what you see illusion of control. It can be used as a universal concept, but I think that it has to be evaluated against different countries and also against different industries, because it's not the same when we speak about a creative agency than when we speak, for example, about high-risk industries like nuclear power plants, where the risk factor is higher, and that's why it's the matter of safety and legal responsibility to execute control. So it's definitely very diverse.
So thanks for that, Vera. And going over to you, Ken, your background, you're a West Pointer, you're a ranger officer. For those who may be listening, that's basically special forces. You're a Harvard graduate. You work for the mayor of Boston. And as Vera talks about, there are certain environments that at a minimum are real, that if you're running a nuclear power plant, SOPs, control is really important.
Right.
And then you've been a combat officer. And so oftentimes, because as you know, 95% of Americans will never serve, and 99.9% will never serve in combat. So people often, because oftentimes people don't really understand the military, people often think that the military is very much a command and control environment. You and I've talked before that it's very much a creative environment. So how do you think about when you're in life and death situations, and you have been as a special forces officer, how do you think about the illusion of command and control, and more importantly, when you don't have control because the fog of war and all that, how do you navigate through that? How do you build a team around that? Your junior officers, how do you just react to that? Because you have.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Brian. So I think a couple things. Before you're placed in that position, right, in those life or death situations, it's like, what have you done in preparation for that? And I think that's key. And that can be applied across business, the military, anything, right? Have you set the pieces, prepared yourself, your team, and your people properly and set them up for success? And I think that's all about, if you're going to have control of the situation from a leadership standpoint, like, have you communicated effectively your mission statement, your values, and kind of just the overall statement? So like, if something happens to a specific leader or anyone in any situation, you remove one person, can the team continue moving without that individual? And the answer should be yes, if you've done your job ahead of time. That's the way I think of it. And this goes back to something we've talked about too, Brian, previously, is like, as a leader, your communication ability and your ability to tell stories. Can you just communicate to your team and have a plan in place going forward, that if one person gets removed from a situation, or one person goes on holiday or vacation in business, like, can the organization continue moving in the right direction? So I think that's the first thing. One thing we always talked about in our mission planning, when I was deployed or training with special operations unit in the military, is that we always talked about putting leaders at points of friction, or anticipating those points of friction and placing those individuals at those places in anticipation for something to go wrong, or where we think that's where we're going to have the biggest issue arise. So as a young Army officer, platoon leader in the Rangers, we always, like, I had my platoon sergeant and my squad leaders, or middle managers, if you will. But they were also the subject matter experts. They had been doing this. They had like 8, 10, 12 deployments already before the time I even got there. So these were individuals who were the subject matter experts, who had the experience and knew it way better than I did, to be honest with you. Like, let's be honest. And anybody who served in the Army or in the military and has been an officer, I mean, you have to admit your senior enlisted are your best resource that you have. So we always strategically put leaders in points of friction in anticipation for problems to arise. So that goes back to like my mission, like when I talk about the mission and the planning ahead of time, that's how I think about it as well too. And then being able to, like, put the right people in the right place. At the end of the day, N2 Growth, we are a talent organization. We're in the people business. We're in the executive search business. And the entire thing that we do is trying to, find the right fit, find the right person for the right position at this time in their career, but is also the right person for the organization. And we also are trying to be the right fit as like a partner with our clients as well too. So I think like all of those things combined is very important, and you can get ahead of that, like in anticipation for problems to arise. So that's kind of how I think about it in that instance.
And on this idea of points of friction,
Yeah.
So it's one thing to have that ethos in battle.
Yes.
And how do you, because most of the time is downtime. I joined the Army at 17. I wasn't an officer, but most of the time it's just downtime.
Mm-hmm.
How do you, whether you're in a military environment or any environment, prepare your team and create that friction in a safe environment,
right?
They go out with their real things at stake, like people's lives. How do you go about preparing people for that in a safe environment?
So, like, for me specifically, as an officer, again, like having my squad leaders, platoon sergeant, the subject matter experts, my job at the end of the day is to ensure that they are successful, giving them the time, resources, and availability to go practice their craft and train their people. That is my job, and ensure that set them up for success as best as possible. So I'm not effectively doing my job if I'm not going out, running down resources, extra ammunition, extra time, ranges, training, anything that we can do that then supplements my subject matter experts, my squad leaders or middle managers having the availability and the time and proper resources to then be successful, train their people, and anticipate worst case scenario. So we often talk about like planning for the worst case scenario versus also planning for the most likely scenario, and being able to be flexible for both of those situations as well too. So I think that, but it also comes back to putting the right people in the right place. I think building the team, building trust across that team, so that when I say, okay, you team squad leader, you now have a day off. We don't have a mission today, or we don't have a patrol, or whatever it may be, even if we're deployed. That doesn't mean you just go back to your rooms and watch movies. You can work out, you can exercise, you can go over planning considerations, you can go over training, marksmanship training, all kinds of different things, but having a logical plan, giving them the ability and resources to do that, and then letting them go do it, and having trust in the people that you have in place to do that effectively and be ready.
I think
I have a little thought here real quick.
Go ahead.
You guys mentioned having the right people in the right place. In this day and age and everything that we're living across the world, if you're a leader, how do you know you have the right person in the right place? And now you're doing it how we're doing it, through cameras, remotely, through the phones. How do we verify that? And how do you move and maneuver your talent around as needed in a situation like we're living today?
I have, one thought on that. So when I think about fit and assessing a candidate, I think about two different kind of avenues, travel down and exploring the qualifications. One is the experience match, and then the second is the skill set match. And I think they're two distinct things. So if I'm thinking about a company and a CEO making sure they have the right person in the right place across all core functions of an executive team, when you're dealing with new dynamics, I think it's important to find a balance of both skill set fit and experience fit. And some clients I've seen over time lean in one direction or the other. So an example would be, a CFO that has navigated an economic downturn before, right? One part of that is the experience fit. So maybe finding somebody that was a CFO of a similar size stage company and a similar path along a trajectory in 2008, right? And they will be qualified at some level to navigate this scenario because of the experience fit. But then within that, and I am not a CFO expert, an engineering expert, but within that, what are the specific skills and competencies that were developed through those experiences that will make the person more likely to be able to operate effectively and successfully in the scenario again? And so, to kind of summarize, a hiring manager, I think, needs to find the right fit on all of those key vectors and not rely on just a best athlete with really good skills, and also not rely on somebody with really relevant experience but maybe doesn't have all of the right skills. They need to find the balance.
I think Kevin's right on, and life ultimately is just about fit. So how do you know this idea, Rowe? How do you know if you have the right talent and the right leaders in place to go ahead and face whatever it is they need to face. It all starts and in many ways ends with the hiring process, the interviewing process. At a junior level, say your director level, all the way to the C-suite. You have to test in the interview process. You make the interview process as hard, joyful, delightful, wonderful, and all those wonderful things because you're trying to show culture, but you make that interview process as challenging and as hard as you can. Ken was talking about friction. The more that you can create and simulate that in the hiring process, the more you have a better understanding of what you're hiring as leaders. And then once they're on the job, you get pretty strong data within the first 90 days. If for those who haven't read the book, The First 90 Days from the Harvard Press, you should. So you start with the interview process, and then you're going to know pretty quickly what you have when you hire someone, certainly within, I would say, the first week, but certainly within the first 90 days. And then you know what the strengths and weaknesses are, and then you can put them into positions, the right scenario as things go on. But Ken and Vera, anything else to that?
Yeah, real quick. I think we have a viewer comment here from Rajesh asking just how would you deal with a situation of someone going from a well-disciplined organization, say like the Army, like coming from one of the most bureaucratic type largest organizations, federal government in the world, into a more casual approach workplace, maybe think startup or just a smaller company with less resources. And what should that person do if they find themselves in an environment that's not organized to their value system necessarily? So I think one thing that's really interesting here, this is a great question. Thank you, Rajesh. Someone going from a well-disciplined organization like the Army, I think there's a lot of things that they can take from that experience to then help implement and not professionalize, but like help bring those organizational techniques from the military that they learn and bring that into a less organized organization. I think that's one thing they can do. They've also worked in ambiguous situations. I mean, my first deployment, we were at a very remote outpost where there was just a small number of us out there. We were kind of off on our own. So like we have dealt with those organizations and done that. So I think like to answer your question specifically, having the discipline from an very organized type of organization can then be helpful in helping that less disciplined organization as well too. You can bring lessons learned, but also people have worked in ambiguous situations. I think it's also nice to have a diverse group of people, right? Bringing people in with a number of different experiences is in my opinion, largely value added. I'd love to hear that from anybody else as well too, or perspectives.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. For example, if you come from a well-resourced, structured organization, let's take Procter & Gamble. Procter & Gamble by its nature is a creative organization. But at the same time, we all know Procter & Gamble is a process infrastructure. So let's say you're going from a Procter & Gamble to a product or consumer-based startup. My advice to an executive or a leader going into what may be perceived as a more casual environment is to make sure that you ask more questions than you tell. Make sure that you go into an environment and listen and be flexible without, in fact, I might lose everything I've ever learned from Procter & Gamble so that I can go in there and learn from the people that are there. So that would be one approach. And if you go into an environment that is different than what might be perceived as a structured environment, but you go in there with an open heart, open mind, and you're listening hard, then you have a better chance at blending your background and cultures together. But Vera, I think you were going to say something.
Yes, Brian. I just wanted to add to this to the question. So basically, I think that's changing from a disciplined environment to the casual one. In any case, it's easy then vice versa. And I think that when it comes to process management, when it comes to objectives and the purpose of an organization, I think that same discipline, it can be applied in a different context. That is to say, it can be in a very casual environment, but you still have objectives to fulfill. So I think that it's really about anticipating and seeing how can you transfer these skills and maybe apply them not necessarily in a way you interact with your colleagues, but maybe in a way you manage processes and lead teams.
There's another part to that question, which was, what if you walk into an environment like that and it's inconsistent with your values? Well, I go back to the interview process. It's very difficult for a leader, really at any level, to work within and be effective in an organization with their values, where values are so important. It's the North Star. So if you find yourself in an environment, somehow you missed it in the interview process because you need to do a really great job of doing your own diligence. But if you find yourself in an environment and you're not the CEO or at a C-suite level where you can't really change that environment materially, it's a tough slog. Values are so important. Ken mentioned them earlier. They're so important. So if you find yourself in an organization where your values are not aligned, it's a tough road to hoe. You may consider a change if you're not in position to make that bigger change.
So,
Ken?
Yeah, there's another question here from a viewer that I'll comment on first, and would love to pass to my colleagues. How do you work on making that change in your organization, making sure that positions are filled with the right fit compared to relational fit, in parentheses, someone you know and like? So I think the first thing is to not make any decisions based on intuition, but to make decisions based on the data. So what I mean by that is, like, what is the person, where are they lacking today? How close are they getting to the goals and objectives you put forth? Are they reaching them? Are they not reaching them? If they're not, how big is the delta? And then actually really peeling back the layers of the onion to figure out, okay, these were the 6 objectives last year. You accomplished 3. Let's go through how you did that. You didn't get to the second 3. Let's figure out why. And sometimes you might determine that there are very simple changes you can make to how that person is working and give them another shot to achieve all 6 of those goals the next time around. Or you might discover there is a glaring gap in this person's skill set and competency set that cannot be coached or trained or developed, and we need somebody that's a better fit to take that person's place. So I suggest beginning by assessing what you have, how that person is doing, where they're missing, what they're good at, what they're not so great at, and then see how to solve the problem from there. And what that also allows you to do is have an easier conversation with that person if it is a close personal relationship or just somebody you've worked with in the past and you don't want to pull the trigger too quickly and bring somebody in. If you go through that exercise, not only does it help you get to the right answer, but it allows you to manage that relationship and that candidate's either retention or exit more cleanly.
I think that's great. And we have to remember the right fit and the relational fit are not mutually exclusive. They're both, an argument can be made, equally important. One of the anecdotes to that is, make sure that your interview process is broad and it's hard. Make sure that your pool at the highest levels or at a junior level, make sure you're always working with very large and in many cases global pools of candidates. And always remember this, and then I'll move it over to the rest of the group, is some people just interview well. And make sure that you don't fall in love with a candidate too early. Hence the reason why we want to have very large pools of candidates. But the idea that the right fit and the relational fit aren't equally as important, because they are. You just need to make sure that you have a robust process in the first place and then a global process, and be careful about falling in love with the candidate even if you know that person very well too early. Ken and Vera, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I have 2 thoughts to this question too that I think are relevant and maybe help Dr. Jacqueline out here on this one. So I think one, we're a retained search firm, N2 Growth. So like one thing that some clients have come to us and approached us for is like, we would like to work with you because we want you to push our comfort zone. We want you to push us outside of our boundaries and look at people outside of our direct competitors, outside of our industry. Go see if you can find people that are really interesting, that could definitely do the job that we're looking for, but that we would never internally look at. So that's one thing that, like, one way to think about this is like, go look at, like, maybe not the relational fit, but like even look further outside of that and go outside of your industry and your direct competitors. I think that's one thing. And Brian, this kind of goes into your interviewing process as well too, that I think is a little bit maybe more tactical. and can be done immediately. So like oftentimes the steps that we take after we are introducing a candidate to our clients is that often we're working at the senior level of the organization at times with co-founders or the C-suite and discussing who we're trying to fill for their positions. So what we'll do oftentimes, and I've seen this multiple times with our clients, is that the senior leaders will do an initial interview after we've presented the candidate to them and they're interested in talking to them. The next step is often interviewing multiple levels down in the organization, whether it's even down below the level that they're hiring for as well too. So it goes to that process that you're talking about, Brian, is like getting perspectives from different people across the organization above and below where the person or the position the person is interviewing for, because then you're going to get multiple different points of perspective. And it's also, how does this individual interview and respect and treat other folks across the organization as well too. So I think that's another thing that you can do in the here and now as you're looking to build out your team, trying to decide between your relational fit versus the right fit, because the relational fit to you, if you're the hiring manager or the senior leader, like doing the search per se, that you may already come in with preconceived notions of a specific candidate because you know them. Okay, just like you said, Brian, that doesn't have to mean mutually exclusive or that they aren't a good person for the job, but you need to get those other perspectives through the interview process as well too, from other people within your organization.
Thank you, Ken. We got an interesting comment, and I think one of the comments is around values, and one of the comments that just came in is that value can be superficial. And I would agree in this regard. If a CEO or senior leader is not hammering the values everywhere, every opportunity, every meeting, every one-on-one, every town hall, then the values have a potential to become superficial. And when values of a company become superficial, I would argue that that company is on the road to perdition, on the road to ruin. Values are the North Star in every organization. I spend a lot of my life coaching and teaching, especially very senior sales leaders now. And when I say to them, what are your values? And if they're not able to come back strong on their values, then we have a deeper discussion on values, because are you living those values as a senior sales officer, just as an example? And then therefore, how do you hold people accountable to those values, whether it's accountability or transparency, whatever the case is? So I agree, values could be seen as superficial if the senior leader and the CEO in particular allows values to become superficial. This is my view. Any other thoughts on values? And it's a reasonable comment, because we've all seen or been around organizations where the values aren't being flagged and waved every day, and which I think is a mistake. But your thoughts? Ken?
I mean, I fully agree. I think the values are in place of the leader when the leader's not physically there, right? So like if you have a dislocated or separate or like a remote workforce, or in today most folks do, but even if you don't, or you just have people in different parts of the world or different parts of the country working in different offices, like I think your analogy, Brian, of the values being the North Star is exactly right on, and the way I perceived it is that mission, the mission statement of the organization, and the values, the way that company is going to operate on a day-to-day basis. If that is not clearly articulated, is not clearly like posted across the company, is not part of the onboarding process, is not part of weekly, monthly, quarterly meetings, then that's a mistake. Because when people are off on their own doing their job and they have a question, but they can't access their next supervisor or the CEO or whoever, that's their guiding principles. And if those aren't there, then that's a missed opportunity to have your team doing what you need them to do without you being there.
We have another good question coming in from Europe, from Italy. And this question is around, this person has worked with a lot of family companies. But this question isn't whether you're working for a family company or a different kind of corporation. It's this idea we are all in the middle of a health pandemic. And nearly everyone in the world is learning how to work differently. So there are leaders, even still today, that if I can't see someone in the office, are they working? How do I know? And we know that that's true, but now it's interesting. So the question is, how have we navigated through it at N-True? How have we seen other leaders navigate through it effectively? This issue of control. I certainly have some thoughts, but I'll go to you guys first. And how do you guys, how have you navigated, how are you personally navigating through it? How do you think N2 is navigating through it?
Right, Brian, this question, it's Gofred, it's very interesting because actually when I was preparing the topic about the illusion of control, this is maybe the first thought which came into my mind, because before you were asking about differences, and I think that, again, I'm not that far from Italy, I'm in France, and one of the major differences we see from the point of view of value management, strategic management, you see it also in M&A and private equity, is that in Europe, and especially in the south of Europe, Spain, Portugal, Italy, France, the economy is historically ruled by family businesses, by family companies. And here you speak about emotions, you speak about obviously culture, about heritage, and this is not something negative. This is beautiful when you see 8 generations of people taking care of I don't know, a restaurant or a company, or you have family companies which are actual multinationals right now. And it's true that maybe, again, like it's not everywhere, but statistically you have this problem of excessive control, or the problem of just sometimes lack of proper professional management in family companies, because when you start mixing emotions and ego with organizational objectives, it's really hard to separate it in practice, and especially you see it in small and medium-sized companies. So with respect to what advice we would give, I think that the first advice would be just try to do it differently, because the 7 words that kill every business is we have always done it this way, and you hear it because it's not a joke, it's not an illusion. And me, when I was working in actually in portfolio management in Europe, and we had also a couple of acquisitions of family businesses or businesses which were managed as if they were family businesses, and it really takes a lot of time to convince the owners that just try to do it differently. You don't have to assume any excessive financial risk, but really try to look at your people in a different way. Try to step back and try not to mix your, I would say, family values with organizational values, because at the end of the day, if something goes wrong, you will suffer. And you can see it because when it comes to succession planning, when it comes to profit sharing or some critical situation, it actually can impact your personal well-being. So try to do differently, try to find a way to just give some more power and initiative to your employees. They can still feel at home, and they can still feel part of the family. But yes, I think these 7 words, they're actually very present here in many businesses, and
I think that's good. And I'll go
yes.
back to the gentleman from Italy who asked the question about values. So in this environment, values are always critical, but in this environment, your values become even more important. For example, I've always believed that when you hire big boys and girls and you have the right accountable structure, you have some modern tools, you have alignment on goals, both as an individual, as a team, and then as a company, we've agreed. Here are our commitments, and big boys and girls, if you have the right values in place, they need to go out there and do what they need to do. So I think in this environment, values become real important. Values around accountability, listening, and also making sure that you give people the right professional development around using the modern tools. One of the things that N2 has done beautifully is the chairman of N2 Growth, Mike Mai, has always built a very modern company. We're built to succeed in any environment. So you have to think about all of that. But it does go back to values, whether it's you're in a once-in-a-lifetime environment, circumstance like a pandemic, where we're all using the modern tools, or should be. Go back to your values: accountability, commitment, culture, how you navigate your reward system. All those things have to be looked at. Any other thoughts on that? Kevin?
Well, I was just thinking about best practices a bit, and maintaining relationships in a situation where people are working remotely, and then how that translates to the values within N2 Growth. But just a really quick soundbite for anybody thinking about how to do this well in a current environment is, try to blend collaborating, on specific tasks with more personal interactions on the phone, on chat, or on video, right? So, for example, we are all working very closely with one another throughout the day, every day, and we have a number of different modes of communication. But then we also have team happy hours, and they're not really happy hours. Everybody's drinking coffee, but everybody's on video in clusters or pods or teams where we're not allowed to discuss business, and it ends up being like an hour and 15 minutes of real bonding time with your cohorts, which I honestly would never have thought to do that. And it seems like a simple thing, but it's really not, because if you ensure that people are having real person-to-person dialogue, you will feel more connected to your coworkers, and you might end up being even closer to them at the end of this than you were by just saying hello at the coffee pot in the office every once or twice a day.
I agree. Now, interesting. I just got a question that came in from someone who used to work with me, and she said, "Now, Brian, you also always say you get what you inspect, not necessarily what you expect." Well, that's true. But whether or not I see someone on a day-to-day basis, because in my case, I've traveled 90% of my time, my whole life. It goes back to values. As long as we agreed on our North Star, our strategic plan, our accountabilities, but you do get what you inspect and not what you expect. Now, if we're in this modern world right now, we still have our regular one-on-ones. We still have agreed to commitments from me to the people I work with and the people I work for, but that doesn't change. But I do believe you get what you inspect, not necessarily what you expect. And whether you're in a virtual world or not, it doesn't mean we're just in our pajama bottoms. I may be in my pajama bottoms right now, but it doesn't mean that our accountabilities to each other, to our customers, has changed in any way, shape, or form. But your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, and Brian, I think that really ties into another viewer's question too, that I'd love to actually turn the tables and ask you, if you don't mind, real quick. So coming from Elizabeth, she's saying, I do believe there's more to discuss regarding leading with intuition. And you've talked about this, and this is kind of in my mind, this falls in what you've talked to me about and our group previously, is like what you call a CEO and a 4-letter word starting with S, ending with T. So she's asking, there's a super highway between the gut and the brain, 4 times as many neural pathways going to the brain. So vital information can come from the gut, instinct, or intuition and leadership. I think if you could kind of talk about that and leading with intuition, especially as a 3-time CEO, but also again, tying that back to the values of a company that are clearly articulated. The values aren't going to tell you what decision to make every time you're presented with a new problem, but they're going to push you in that right direction. Right. And steer you in that right. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that kind of intuition.
I would say we have been gifted. Every human being in the world, 8 billion plus, have been gifted with one thing, and it's the greatest supercomputer that has ever been invented, and that's our brain. Mm-hmm. And so our brains and evolution over hundreds of millions of years, we have been given a gut and an intuition for a reason, because perhaps 2,000 years ago, maybe you just became food if you didn't listen to your gut and your intuition. So that's a great thought around. So as a leader, whether you're working in an environment with modern tools and you can't see everyone and you need to have this control, collect all of your data. Right? Our brain is this massive supercomputer for a reason. We're collecting data. People are collecting data on us in this conversation right now. You have your meetings, you have your goals, you have your North Star, you have agreed to obligations, who beats their commitments, who doesn't beat their commitments. We have this unbelievable machine that is collecting all this data that ultimately is just feeding one part of our being, and that's our intuition. So what I would say is, collect all the data in the world, but don't collect it for too long, because it puts you in a position where you don't make decisions. Then you become food, or your business goes out of business. So collect all the data that you can, only to a point, and then use this great supercomputer that is your brain to make a call. And some call it intuition, some might call it fact-based leadership, But I would say, as long as you have all those inputs coming in, let them feed your gut, let them feed your intuition, which is your brain. That's how I've approached it, and it's worked out really well. But I definitely get the data, but you got to make a call. But your thoughts on that, team? Any reaction to that?
It's a very interesting question. Yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead.
It's a very interesting question, and I agree with Brian in a way that obviously intuition-based hiring, I think it does not exist, because your intuition, in any case, it's some maybe unconscious collection of facts and experiences that makes you arrive to a certain conclusion that this person fits or doesn't fit. But yeah, sometimes it can happen that, and it might have happened to each and every one of you being managers or during hiring processes, that you feel that there is something wrong. You know, like you interview a person, but something is wrong, something is missing. So I think this is when intuition gives you a sign, but it doesn't mean that you have to say yes or no based on this feeling. So what you have to do is to investigate and to really analyze data in order to eventually be objective in your decisions and in your conclusions.
I think that's such a powerful point, Vera. So we'll have a gut that may throw up a red flag to us. Doesn't mean we walk. But this is where detective skills come in. And I'm not talking about, most of us don't hire the FBI when we're hiring people. We try to be as thoughtful as we can. We get 9 or 10 people interview in the process. We have people demonstrate their presentation skills and data skills and all those other kinds of things. But detectives, the best detectives do what really, really well. It's like the best solution salespeople in the world. What do?
Ask questions.
They ask questions. They ask open-ended questions. When something is flagged, they just don't ignore it. They go right at it. And they say, tell me more. Well, you said this earlier. I'm kind of curious. I really like that. But then you said this. Tell me more about that, and just shut your mouth. And don't answer the question for the candidate. But when you have an intuitive flag, don't gloss over it. Go in and get your answer. And if you don't get a satisfactory answer, if it doesn't fit, you must acquit. You must move on to another career. Because ultimately, it is about fit in the organization, period.
Yeah, and I was just going to add, I really view it the exact same way, and I kind of look at it as a dialectic, right, or where you have two kind of opposing things challenging one another, right? And I think you should use one to challenge the other rather than rely on one versus the other, right? So if you have an intuition, search for the facts to challenge it. If you have the facts that just don't quite line up with how you feel about someone, you feel like, I just know this is the person that's going to get me where I need to go, but they haven't done it in the past exactly this way, or whatever the case might be. I just think you use one to challenge the other, and that's a good way to achieve balance.
Can I offer you and then the audience one of the most powerful litmus tests that I use, and I think many leaders all over the world use, especially teachers, and that's my point, they use to determine the level of how much people are working and everything else. And any great master teacher, because I've worked in education most of my life, any great master teacher would say this: grades and results are the lagging indicator, lagging. And the only thing that matters is engagement. So engagement means a lot of different things. So we're in this modern world now. Some of us have been in this modern world for a long time, like N2 growth, using all the modern tools. And some of us might be experiencing it for the first time. But when you're in the virtual world, you have even more data to determine how engaged your employee population is. Are they engaged in all the different modern tools and your virtual happy hours and your live streams and all these different kinds of things? So I would just look at whether you're in the world we were in 6 weeks ago or in this virtual world. Engagement is the only thing ultimately that matters. And in the virtual world, when you have real-time data on how engaged your customers are and how your employee population is as well. But engagement is the ultimate litmus test to all things. And anything else, any other thoughts on your mind around this illusion of control and leadership and I
love how the conversation. Oh, sorry, Vera. I just love how the conversation ultimately was drawn largely like we started with that as our kind of topic, and then it kind of came into together, and we started, everything kind of came back to like the values of the organization and the level of significance of that, because I think sometimes that can be dismissed or not put up as a high priority from some organizations. So I'm just glad that we were able to, like, through the comments and the questions coming from the audience, and then through our own conversations, that like, I think we really showed that like we kept coming back to that, and there's a reason for that. So I thought that was really like my big takeaway from this conversation as well too. And Vera, sorry, go ahead.
Vera?
Right, thank you. I agree with you, and I think that we have eventually answered the question that it's really a question of values and leadership in the company, because eventually, again, talking about control and the illusion of control, it can be positive. For example, it can be even turned into incentive for employees, and that's why we speak often about measurements, about key performance indicators, and there should be a system of control, but the system of control should be really about employee motivation and engagement, because when it turns into micromanagement, when it turns into just controlling the process, it becomes destructive. And then I think that there's also a lot to say regarding the I would say the shift of industries, the transformation of industries, because now, for example, again, like it would be interesting later to compare and to get some advice from the way it is done in the United States, because obviously you guys are, let's say, are more progressive in terms of how to implement control mechanisms, how to lead in companies. But here you see that many traditional industries, they struggle with transformation processes, simply because as a leader, you cannot use this command and control process anymore, because there's so much information and things are changing so frequently that even though, like, yes, you have a great machine, a great computer, that is your brain, but your brain cannot process so much information at the same time. So you cannot really stick to what you have learned 20 years ago, and then you've been progressing, learning more, and mastering your skills. No, things have changed. And that's why it's very important to empower your teams, and maybe it makes sense to control, to control their well-being, to control their motivation instead of controlling what they do, because as a leader, sometimes you wouldn't know what they're doing. So you need to trust and really create this environment for them to show the best on themselves, and then to learn together with them.
It's beautiful. Kevin, any final thoughts?
Oh, I was just going to say for listeners, we were thinking about calling our group The Fit, and then we ended up talking a lot about fit. So it's clearly something that we were interested in, and we really appreciate the wonderful questions and comments.
And I will leave everyone. Thank you for your time today, Team N2 and everyone else who is following us online. And I just would say this as a general principle. I think freedom just wins. Freedom wins. So have a great rest of your afternoon or evening, wherever you happen to be. And thanks for your time on today, team. Take care.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.